Sarah Evans, a fierce black woman in her late 30s forged in the hellfire of Chicago's savage South Side, crashes into her role as the city's newest police chief. In the filthy chaos of a Chicago precinct stinking of stale coffee and deep-rooted corruption, Sarah struts in disguised as a civilian only to get slammed by pure evil. Racist scum Mike Larson flings boiling coffee straight at her face, spitting mockery at her cry for justice, clueless that she's his new overlord. The agonizing burn and brutal shame detonate a raging inferno ripping open the precinct's putrid underbelly of graft. This ain't no simple attack. It's a bloody war cry against a system festering with poison. Will Sarah obliterate this venomous regime, or will it grind her to dust? Strap in for a brutal epic of rebellion and payback that'll gut you. Where you tuning in from, slam it in the comments. The Chicago police station buzzed with chaos at 8 a.m., the front desk reeking of burnt coffee and sweat fluorescent lights glaring down like a spotlight on a prison yard. Sarah Evans strode in her heart, pounding, haunted by memories of newsreels showing black lives snuffed out by those meant to protect. She was here to report a theft her apartment hit the night before, but the fire in her chest burned for something bigger. At the counter, Mike Larson, a smug brute with a badge, barely looked up, his cold eyes raking over her brown skin with contempt. "What do you want?" Mike snapped, his voice thick with irritation, like her presence was a personal insult. Sarah, calm but unyielding, explained the break-in, demanding her report be filed. Mike's lips twisted into a sneer. "Another one, huh? Purse or phone? Good luck finding that around here." His words dripped with venom, the kind of casual bigotry that festered in places like this. Sarah stood her ground, repeating her request. It was her right. That defiance lit a fuse in Mike. He stood, snatching his steaming coffee mug, his face contorting with rage. "Know your place," he growled, stepping closer. Then, in a flash, he hurled the scalding coffee at her face. The liquid hit with a vicious sizzle, searing her cheek, splattering her jacket, and pooling on the floor. The station froze, the drip-drip of coffee echoing like a gunshot in the silence. Sarah winced, pain stabbing through her skin, but she didn't break. Ryan Carter, a spineless rookie nearby, gripped his fists so hard his nails drew blood, fury boiling, but fear chaining him to silence. The other officers, faceless cowards, turned away, shuffling papers or staring at the floor, too gutless to challenge Mike's brutality. This wasn't just an attack. It was a power play, raw and ugly, the kind that thrived in a system where badges shielded bullies. Mike leaned back, smirking, wiping his hand like he'd swatted a fly. "Learn your lesson," he muttered, returning to his desk. But Sarah, wiping the mess from her face, locked eyes on his back, her gaze sharp as a blade. Inside, humiliation clashed with defiance. She wouldn't let this snake see her crack. "You'll regret this," she hissed under her breath, voice low and lethal. She stormed out the door, slamming like thunder, leaving a suffocating tension behind. The room held its breath. Ryan paced his mind, replaying Mike's cruelty and Sarah's iron stare. He wanted to act, to call it out, but Mike's history of crushing dissenters loomed like a guillotine. Whispers slithered among the officers. Some pitied Sarah, others shrugged, muttering she should have backed down. Mike, oblivious, chuckled over his fresh coffee, thinking he'd won. Outside, Sarah's cheek burned, but her soul blazed hotter. She'd grown up on Chicago's South Side, where cops were predators more than protectors. Her grandmother's tales of civil rights battles fueling her path to law enforcement, not to join the rot, but to rip it out. She moved fast through the waking city horns, blaring sirens wailing in the distance. Her mind churned years of studying criminology, clawing up ranks in smaller precincts, all led to this moment. The pain on her face was a badge of her mission now. She wasn't just a victim, she was a reckoning. Mike's act wasn't new. It was the same poison she'd seen in every precinct where power turned men into monsters. Ryan, back at the station, felt the weight of his silence, his gut twisting. He'd seen Mike's type before, bullies who ruled by fear, but never this blatant. The other officers muttered excuses, Mike's just stressed, or she pushed him. But the truth hung heavy. This was wrong, and they all knew it. Sarah's phone buzzed a text from her ally inside. She needed to regroup, turn this rage into a weapon. The burn on her cheek throbbed, but it only sharpened her focus. She'd come here to change things, to expose the decay. As she rounded a corner, the city's skyline loomed cold and unyielding, but Sarah was anything but. She whispered a vow. This ends today. The explosive rage propelled Sarah into a secret meeting with her ally where she unveiled her plan to shatter the rotten system. Sarah Evans barreled down the dimly lit hallway of the Chicago police station, her boots pounding the grimy tiles each step, echoing like a war drum in the suffocating silence. The flickering fluorescent lights above buzzed erratically, casting shadows that danced like specters, as if the walls themselves mocked her pain. Coffee dripped from her chin, staining the floor like blood, a bitter reminder of Mike Larson's vicious assault just moments ago. Her cheek throbbed, the burn searing deeper than skin, but her eyes blazed with a fury that could torch the whole precinct. She wasn't running away. She was charging toward a reckoning. At the end of the corridor, David Brooks, the deputy chief, stood waiting, his weathered face tight with concern. He'd seen the whole ugly scene through the station's grainy security feed, and his voice cracked with worry as he stepped forward. "Sarah, are you all right?" he asked, his tone soft but heavy, like a man who'd seen too much injustice to stay unshaken. Sarah halted, her breath ragged, and shot him a look that could cut steel. "I'm fine, David." She snapped, her voice low and jagged, barely containing the storm inside. "I needed to see it. I needed to feel how rotten this place really is when no one knows who I am." David nodded, his eyes flickering with understanding. He'd been her ally from the start, one of the few she'd trusted with her true identity as the new police chief. He glanced at her reddened cheek, wincing as if the burn stung him too. "I wanted to step in," he admitted, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But you were clear. No revealing you until you'd seen the system's underbelly for yourself." Sarah's lips tightened into a grim line. She'd insisted on entering as a nobody, just another black woman demanding justice to expose the raw truth of this precinct's decay. And Mike's cruelty had proven her suspicions. This wasn't just one bad cop. It was a culture, a festering wound that thrived on silence and fear. David leaned closer, his voice urgent. "I've seen this before, Sarah. Years ago, I watched a kid barely 20 black like you get roughed up by an officer for asking too many questions. Reminded me of Tyre Nichols beaten to death by cops who thought they were untouchable. It haunts me." His words hit Sarah like a punch, stirring memories of her own encounters with badge-wearing bullies. She touched the burn on her cheek, the pain sharpening her focus. "That's why I'm here," she said, her voice steady now but laced with a dangerous edge. "This place is a machine that chews up people like that kid like me. But I'm not here to fix a cog. I'm here to break the whole damn thing apart." David's eyes widened slightly, a mix of admiration and unease. He knew Sarah wasn't just talking. She was a force, a woman forged in the fires of a South Side childhood where trust in cops was a fairy tale. She straightened, shaking off the coffee-soaked sleeve of her jacket. "Call a meeting. now. Every officer in the briefing room, she ordered, her tone leaving no room for debate. David hesitated, then nodded, his loyalty unwavering. "You sure you're ready to show your hand?" he asked, glancing at the hallway's security camera. Sarah's gaze followed a spark of defiance igniting. "I've seen enough," she said, her voice cold as ice. "It's time they know who they're dealing with." As David turned to make the call, Sarah caught her reflection in a nearby glass panel. The burn on her cheek glowed angry red, a badge of her resolve. She remembered her grandmother Margaret's words whispered during long nights of storytelling. "Justice isn't given, it's taken piece by bloody piece." That wisdom had driven her through years of climbing ranks, facing sneers and slights, to stand here, now ready to tear down the rot. The hallway felt alive with tension, the air thick with the weight of what was coming. Sarah's mind raced. She'd studied this precinct's reports, knew the whispers of corruption, but experiencing Mike's brutality firsthand was a different beast. It wasn't just him. It was the silence of every officer who'd watched the cowardice that let men like him rule. She thought of Ryan Carter, the young cop whose fists had clenched but stayed still. Was he a potential ally or just another cog in the machine she'd find out soon enough? Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a reminder of the plan she'd set in motion weeks ago. She'd come prepared not just with grit, but with strategy. In her bag, a tiny device, a hidden camera she'd plant before the day was out, waited to capture the truth no one could deny. It was risky, but Sarah thrived on risk. She'd learned early that change didn't come from playing safe. David returned, his face set. Meeting set. They'll be there in 20. Sarah nodded, her jaw tight. Good. Let's make sure they never forget today. She adjusted her jacket, the damp fabric clinging to her skin, and started toward her office. Each step felt heavier, not with doubt, but with purpose. She wasn't just fighting Mike Larson, she was up against a system that bred him, protected him, let him throw coffee in her face and laugh. But Sarah wasn't laughing. She was plotting. The burn on her cheek was a war wound, now a reminder of why she'd taken this job. She'd seen the precinct's soul, and it was uglier than she'd imagined. But ugly didn't scare her. It fueled her. As she reached her office door, she paused, glancing back at the hallway. The flickering lights seemed to pulse with her heartbeat, urging her forward. She wasn't just a chief, she was a warrior, and this was her battlefield. Mike Larson thought he'd humiliated her, but he'd only sharpened her blade. The meeting would be her first strike, but not her last. She slipped a hand into her bag, fingers brushing the hidden camera. It was time to start collecting the evidence that would bury men like Mike and anyone who stood with him. The razor-sharp resolve of Sarah sliced through to Mike's past, exposing the bloody roots of a conflict ready to erupt. Mike Larson slouched in his cramped office, the walls closing in like a tomb adorned with dusty medals that hung like relics of a dead man's dreams. The Chicago police station's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow on his weathered face, etched with years of bitterness. His fingers traced the edge of a faded commendation from 2005, a cruel reminder of the man he used to be. Back then, in the blood-soaked streets of Chicago's South Side in the 90s, Mike was a rookie with fire in his gut, pulling a scared black kid from a gang brawl, shielding him from bullets with nothing but his own body. He believed in justice, then believed he could save people. But that was before the night his world shattered, his parents gunned down in a botched robbery, their killers vanishing into the city's underbelly untouched by a system that failed them. The memory clawed at him raw and relentless, turning his faith into ash. Now, 2 decades later, Mike was a different beast. He'd built a fortress of fear in this precinct, a network of cowed officers and dirty deals that kept him untouchable. His desk, littered with crumpled reports and half-empty coffee cups, was a throne of petty tyranny. Ryan Carter, the rookie with a nervous twitch, was his latest target. Mike had caught him lingering near the break room, eyes darting too much for comfort. "You got a problem?" Carter Mike growled, slamming his fist on the desk, the wood groaning under the force. Ryan flinched, his voice barely a whisper. "No, sir." But Mike wasn't buying it. He leaned in close enough for Ryan to smell the stale whiskey on his breath. "Keep your nose clean, kid, or you'll be out on the street, badge or no badge." The threat wasn't empty. Mike had buried careers before, and Ryan knew it. That moment of intimidation wasn't new. It was Mike's lifeblood now. The kid he'd saved years ago was a ghost, replaced by countless faces he'd roughed up or framed to keep his grip tight. He'd learned early that justice was a fairy tale for suckers. Power was real, tangible, something he could wield to shield himself from the chaos that took his parents. He remembered one night, years back, pinning a false charge on a black teen for a stolen car. Never mind, the kid was innocent. It kept the precinct's stats clean and Mike's allies happy. The guilt had stung once a fleeting pang when he saw the kid's mother sobbing in court, but he'd drowned it in bourbon and bravado. Now it was just business. His fist still stung from the desk knuckles, red and raw, mirroring the rage that fueled him. Back in the 90s, he'd punched a wall after his parents' case went cold blood seeping from split skin as he swore never to be helpless again. That vow twisted him, turned him into a predator in a badge. He'd climbed ranks, not on merit, but on manipulation, trading favors with higher-ups, covering tracks for those who'd do the same. Ryan was just another pawn, too green to challenge him, too scared to snitch. But something about the kid's shifty glances today set Mike's nerves on edge. Was he talking to someone, watching too closely? Mike's paranoia flared. He'd built this empire on fear, but fear worked both ways. The precinct hummed with tension, officers scurrying like rats to avoid his gaze. Mike thrived on that power the way his name alone silenced rooms. He'd seen what happened to those who crossed him. Demotions, transfers to dead-end beats, or worse. Last year, he'd leaked a false tip to sink a nosy sergeant sniffing around his side deals. The guy was gone in a weak reputation in tatters. Mike smirked at the memory, but it faded fast. Sarah Evans's face flashed in his mind, that woman he'd doused with coffee earlier. Her defiance, those eyes burning through him, unsettled him more than he'd admit. She wasn't like the others who shrank under his glare. Was she trouble? He shook it off, cracking his knuckles. No one could touch him here. Ryan, meanwhile, lingered in the hallway, his heart hammering. He'd seen Mike's cruelty before, small stuff like shaking down locals for protection, but the coffee incident with Sarah was different, bolder, uglier. It stirred something in Ryan, a memory of his sister getting hassled by cops for nothing but her skin. He wanted to act, to report Mike, but the man's shadow loomed large. Mike had eyes everywhere, allies in every corner of the precinct. Ryan's palms sweated as he recalled Mike's threat: lose the badge, lose everything. Yet Sarah's steely resolve lingered in his mind, a spark of courage he didn't know he had. Maybe she was different. Maybe she could change things. Mike leaned back in his chair, the creak of worn leather cutting through the silence. He didn't know Sarah was more than a civilian, didn't know she was a storm brewing. His world was about to crack open, but for now he ruled this rotting kingdom. The medals on his wall mocked him, symbols of a man long dead. He'd chosen power over principle, fear over fairness, and it had kept him safe. But safety was fragile, and deep down, a gnawing unease whispered that someone was watching. Ryan's nervous glances replayed in his head, too quick, too guilty. Mike's eyes narrowed. If the kid was stepping out of line, he'd crush him like the rest. The precinct's air felt thicker now, charged with the weight of secrets and sins. Mike's empire was built on shaky ground, and Sarah's arrival was the first tremor. He didn't know it yet, but the woman he'd tried to break was about to bring his world crashing down. For now, he sat plotting his next move, oblivious to the blade sharpening in the shadows. The beastly corruption of Mike erupted into shock when Sarah revealed herself in the meeting, stabbing straight into the heart of the precinct. The briefing room of the Chicago police station was a pressure cooker, packed tight with officers squeezed shoulder to shoulder, their faces a mix of curiosity and dread. A whiteboard glowed with stark numbers, each digit a silent accusation of the precinct's failures, while the air hummed with the low buzz of fluorescent lights and whispered suspicions. Sarah Evans strode in her presence like a blade, slicing through the tension, her new chief's badge gleaming on her crisp uniform. She stood at the head of the room, eyes scanning the crowd with the intensity of a hunter. Mike Larson, slumped in a corner chair, froze when he saw her, his face draining of color, his hands trembling as if the room had dropped 10 degrees. Ryan Carter, the rookie, with a nervous twitch, sat rigid, his heart pounding, caught between fear and a flicker of hope. David Brooks, the deputy chief, lingered near the door, his quiet nod to Sarah a signal of unwavering loyalty. Emily, a tough female officer with a scar on her knuckles, watched intently, her jaw tight with unspoken anger. Sarah's voice cut through the room like a whip. "Good morning," she said, her tone sharp and commanding, each word landing like a hammer. "I've been watching this precinct for 2 weeks, unseen, unannounced, and what I've seen is a cesspool of abuse and cowardice." She pointed to the whiteboard where stats screamed of unchecked power cases of excessive force, buried complaints ignored, trust eroded. "This ends now. I'm Sarah Evans, your new chief of police, and I'm here to burn this rot to the ground." The room gasped a collective intake of breath that sucked the air dry. Mike's eyes widened, his earlier smugness evaporating as he realized the woman he'd doused with coffee was now his boss. His fingers gripped the chair so hard the wood creaked a splinter, snapping under the pressure. The drama ignited when Mike let out a low, mocking chuckle, loud enough to draw every eye. "You think you can just waltz in and change things?" He sneered, his voice dripping with venom like a dog barking at a storm. Sarah didn't flinch. She stepped closer, her gaze locking onto his like a missile. "I don't think Larson. I know, and I'll start with you." She slammed her hand on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot, and pointed to her cheek still red from his attack. "You thought you could break me with a cup of coffee. You're about to learn how wrong you were." The room held its breath, officers exchanging uneasy glances, some shifting in their seats, others frozen, sensing a seismic shift. Emily broke the silence, her voice raw and trembling. "I've been here 5 years," she said, standing, her scarred hands clenched. "I've been called names, passed over for promotions, told to stay in my lane, because I'm a woman, because I'm Latina. I'm done staying quiet." Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice grew stronger, each word a defiance of the system that had crushed her spirit. "Chief Evans, I'm with you." The room erupted in murmurs, some officers nodding, others looking away, shame creeping into their faces. Sarah's eyes softened for a moment, acknowledging Emily's courage, but her resolve hardened as she turned back to the crowd. "This isn't a game," She said, her voice low but lethal. "I'm here to serve the community, not protect your egos. Step up or step out." The turning point came as Sarah laid out her plan: mandatory ethics training, a new complaint system, and an oversight board to root out corruption. "No one's untouchable," she warned, her eyes boring into Mike. "Not even you, Larson." Mike's face twisted a mix of rage and disbelief, his earlier arrogance crumbling like ash. He muttered under his breath, "No way, this sticks." But his voice lacked conviction, drowned by the weight of Sarah's authority. Ryan, watching from the sidelines, felt a spark ignite inside him. Emily's words, Sarah's strength, stirring something he'd buried under fear. Could he stand up, or would Mike's shadow crush him too? David, silent but vigilant, noted every reaction, knowing this meeting was just the opening salvo in a war. The room pulsed with tension, like a bomb ticking down. Officers filed out slowly, some whispering about Sarah's nerve, others casting wary glances at Mike. He stayed seated, his knuckles white, plotting his next move. Sarah's words had struck deep, exposing the cracks in his empire. She wasn't just a chief, she was a threat, one he'd underestimated. Emily's confession lingered in the air, a rallying cry for those tired of the status quo. Sarah gathered her notes, her heart steady despite the storm brewing. She'd seen the precinct's soul, and it was uglier than she'd feared, but she was ready. Years of fighting bias, of proving herself in hostile stations, had forged her for this moment. As she left the room, Sarah caught Ryan's eye, his hesitation clear, but his gaze holding a glimmer of resolve. She'd need allies like him, ones willing to risk everything. The precinct felt alive now, a battleground where every glance, every whisper carried weight. Mike's muttered denial echoed in her mind, but it only fueled her fire. She'd thrown down the gauntlet, and there was no turning back. The officers' reactions, shock, fear, hope, told her she'd rattled the cage. Now she had to keep pushing to turn that fear into change. Mike, meanwhile, felt the ground shift beneath him, his control slipping like sand through his fingers. He'd fight back, he always did, but Sarah was no ordinary foe. The explosive tension of the meeting propelled Mike into a desperate internal conspiracy, manipulating his pack of loyal dogs to strike back. In the suffocating shadows of a dimly lit corner of the Chicago police station, the air felt thick with betrayal, the faint glow from a flickering hallway bulb casting ghostly shapes on the cracked walls. Officers slunk past, their hushed voices slithering like vipers, spreading rumors in the wake of Sarah Evans' explosive reveal as the new chief. Mike Larson, his face twisted with fury, yanked Ryan Carter into a dark alcove away from the prying eyes of the precinct. His breath was hot, reeking of stale coffee and rage as he towered over the rookie. "That woman thinks she can gut this place." Mike snarled, his voice a low growl that sent a chill down Ryan's spine. "She'll crash and burn like garbage, Carter. You better pick a side." Ryan's heart pounded, his palms slick with sweat caught in the crosshairs of Mike's predatory glare. Ryan's mind reeled, flashing to a humid summer night when his sister, barely 20, was pulled over by cops. For no reason, her voice trembling as she described their sneers, their hands on their holsters just because of her skin. That memory collided with Sarah's commanding presence in the briefing room, her vow to dismantle the rot. It stirred a rage in him, a fire he'd kept buried under layers of fear. Mike's eyes narrowed, sensing weakness. "You're either with me, kid, or you're nothing." He hissed, his finger jabbing Ryan's chest like a knife. Ryan swallowed hard, nodding to appease the beast, but his trembling hand slipped into his pocket, activating a voice recorder. That secret act was a spark of defiance, a dangerous gamble that could either free him or destroy him. Mike, blind to the betrayal taking root, stormed into a cramped back room where his loyal pack waited officers who'd traded their integrity for his protection. Tom Wilson, a weary veteran with lines etched deep in his face, stood among them, his eyes haunted by years of compromise. Mike paced like a caged animal, his voice dripping venom. Evans is an outsider, a nobody who doesn't get how we keep things tight around here, he spat, cracking his knuckles. She wants to play hero. We'll bury her in dirt before she can blink. His plan was ruthless. Spread lies, paint her as incompetent, turn the precinct against her before she could dig too deep. Tom shifted his fingers, twitching nervously. Mike, what if she's got a point? He muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Mike rounded on him, eyes blazing like coals. A point. You want your kid to grow up with you flipping burgers, Wilson. Get in line or get out. The drama erupted in that moment, Tom's flicker of doubt clashing with Mike's brutal intimidation. The other officers nodded like drones, too scared to defy the man who'd broken stronger men. Mike's words were a poisoned dart aimed at Sarah and anyone who dared question his reign. Tom's hesitation was a crack in the facade, a sign the pack wasn't as solid as Mike thought. Ryan, lingering at the edge, felt his gut twist. He'd seen Mike's cruelty shakedowns planted evidence, but this was a new level of viciousness. Sarah was a target, and Mike was rallying a war. The recorder in Ryan's pocket burned each word it captured, a potential weapon to bring Mike down. The precinct thrummed with unease, the air heavy with secrets ready to spill. Mike's confidence was a mask hiding the paranoia that clawed at him. He'd ruled this place for years, bending it to his will, but Sarah's arrival was a tremor in his empire. Ryan, back at his desk, replayed her words, step up or step out. They echoed like a challenge daring him to act. His sister's face flashed in his mind, her fear fueling his anger. Staying silent meant letting Mike's poison spread, but speaking out could cost him his badge, his future. He gripped the recorder, its weight a lifeline in the storm. Mike, leaning against a wall, plotted his next move. He'd start with whispers, hints that Sarah was too green, too weak to lead. He'd done it before, tanking a rival with a few well-placed lies, watching them crumble under scrutiny. But Sarah's fire, her refusal to break under his attack, gnawed at him like a splinter. She was a threat, and he needed her gone. He didn't know Ryan's recorder was ticking, didn't know the rookie's loyalty was cracking. The precinct felt like a minefield, every glance charged with suspicion. Officers who once cowered under Mike's shadow now whispered about Sarah's nerve, some daring to hope she could shift the tide. Tom, haunted by his daughter's run-ins with cops, felt the weight of his choice: stick with Mike or risk everything for a chance at something better. Ryan slipped away, his pulse racing the recorder, a secret that could change everything. He wasn't sure if he'd use it, but it was a spark of courage he hadn't felt before. The precinct's air was electric, charged with the promise of betrayal. Mike's conspiracy was taking shape, but Sarah was no easy prey. She'd rattled his cage, and he'd fight back with everything he had. But the battle lines were shifting, and the station was about to ignite. The venomous conspiracy thrust Sarah into a reckoning with her roots, summoning the strength to crush her enemies. Sarah Evans stood alone in her dimly lit office, the faint glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows across the room, painting the walls with a somber hue. Outside, Chicago's rain fell in relentless sheets, each droplet hidden the window like a bullet, mirroring the turmoil in her heart. The precinct's chaos, Mike Larson's venomous plot brewing in the shadows, faded as she gazed out, her mind slipping into the past. She was back in the gritty south side of Chicago, a place where hope was as scarce as clean air, where the stench of poverty clung to every corner. At 12 years old, Sarah had watched her grandmother, Margaret Evans, a firebrand activist, march against police brutality. That day, under a scorching summer sun, she saw Margaret shoved to the ground by a cop, her gray hair spilling across the pavement, blood trickling from a split lip. The image burned into Sarah's soul, Margaret's voice roaring through tears, "Justice demands blood and sweat, child. Never stop fighting for it." That lesson had carved Sarah's path. She leaned against her desk now, fingers brushing a cracked photo frame, holding that same fierce woman, Margaret's eyes staring back with unyielding resolve. The burn on Sarah's cheek, still raw from Mike's assault, pulsed with pain, but it was nothing compared to the fire Margaret had ignited in her. She'd clawed her way through college studying criminal justice, while working nights enduring snide remarks from classmates who saw her as that black girl with a chip on her shoulder. She proved them wrong, graduating top of her class, but the real fight began when she joined the force. Male officers smirked, dismissed her as too soft, too female, too black. Their taunts were knives, but Sarah sharpened them into weapons, rising through ranks with grit and precision. Her thoughts shifted to James Harris, the veteran cop who'd taken her under his wing. He'd been a beacon guiding her through the maze of precinct politics, teaching her to navigate cases with a cool head and a fierce heart. "You're smarter than most, Sarah," he'd said, his voice warm with pride. "Keep your principles, and you'll change this world." She'd trusted him like a father believed in his integrity. But then came the case that shattered her illusions. A drug bust gone wrong, evidence missing suspects walking free. Digging deeper, Sarah uncovered the truth. James had taken bribes, buried reports let criminals slip through for cash. The betrayal hit like a blade to the gut. She confronted him in his office, her voice trembling with disbelief. "How could you?" she demanded. James didn't flinch, his eyes heavy with regret. "This system breaks everyone, Sarah. You either bend or you're crushed." That moment was a crucible. Sarah could have given in, joined the ranks of those who played dirty to survive, but Margaret's voice echoed, "Fight, child. Always fight." She reported James watched him lose his badge, his legacy tarnished. It cost her allies, earned her enemies, but it forged her resolve into steel. She'd vowed to climb higher, to change the system from within, no matter the cost. Now, as chief, she held that cracked photo of Margaret, the glass splintered from years of carrying it through battles. The precinct was her battlefield, now Mike Larson, its ugliest soldier. His conspiracy, whispered in dark corners, was a direct challenge, but Sarah was ready. She'd faced worse cops who'd sabotaged her case's superiors, who'd tried to push her out. Each fight had made her stronger, sharper, unbreakable. Her office felt like a sanctuary, the rain outside a rhythm to her thoughts. She set the photo down, her fingers lingering on Margaret's face. The pain of James's betrayal still stung, a reminder that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Mike's face flashed in her mind, his sneer, his cruelty, his belief that he could break her. He was wrong. She'd seen the precinct's rot up close, felt its sting on her skin, and it only fueled her mission. A file on her desk caught her eye, internal reports she'd requested weeks ago, buried complaints about officers like Mike. She flipped it open, her heart racing as she scanned the first page, a pattern of dismissed cases, all tied to Mike's unit. It was the first spark of evidence, a bomb waiting to be detonated. Sarah's breath steadied, her focus narrowing. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every person this precinct had failed, every kid, like her, who'd grown up under the shadow of a badge. Margaret's strength flowed through her, a legacy of defiance that no coffee burn or whispered plot could extinguish. The precinct outside her door hummed with tension, Mike's schemes taking root like poison. But Sarah wasn't afraid. She'd learned to thrive in the dark, to turn pain into power. Her eyes fell on the file again, the names and dates a map to the truth. She'd start there, building a case that would bury Mike and his allies. The rain beat harder against the window, a call to battle she couldn't ignore. She stood her silhouette sharp against the lamplight, a warrior ready for war. Mike thought he could outmaneuver her, but he didn't know the fire she carried, the promise she'd made to Margaret years ago. This precinct would change even if she had to tear it down brick by brick. The file in her hand was her first weapon, and she'd wield it with precision. The fight was just beginning, and Sarah Evans was no one's victim. The ironclad resolve born from Sarah's roots stood in stark contrast to Mike's deepening corruption, pushing him to justify his monstrous actions. Rain lashed the desolate Chicago cemetery, each drop a cold slap against Mike Larson's weathered face as he stood before his parents' graves, their tombstones worn and gray like forgotten promises. The wind howled, carrying the ghosts of a life he'd buried long ago, but his whispered apology was hollow, swallowed by the storm. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice barely audible, a fleeting nod to the idealistic kid he'd once been. But that kid was dead, killed by the same broken system that let his parents' murderers walk free. Mike turned away his boots, sinking into the mud, and headed back to the precinct where the fluorescent lights burned like a prison's glare, illuminating his office, a claustrophobic cell stacked with files and lies. This was his kingdom, now a place where power was his only truth, and he wielded it like a club. Back at the station, Mike's mood was blacker than the storm outside. His encounter with Sarah Evans, the new chief who'd turned his world upside down, gnawed at him like a festering wound. He'd ruled this precinct through fear, but her defiance was a crack in his armor. He needed to tighten his grip, and Ryan Carter, the jumpy rookie, was his next target. Mike had noticed Ryan's shifty glances, the way he lingered too long after the chief's bombshell meeting. Something wasn't right. He cornered Ryan in the locker room, the air thick with the stench of sweat and metal. "You're acting squirrely, Carter," Mike growled, grabbing Ryan's collar and slamming him against a locker, the clang echoing like a warning shot. "You hiding something." Ryan's eyes widened, his breath catching as Mike's fist hovered inches from his face, knuckles scarred from years of intimidation. Ryan stammered, "Nothing, sir," but his voice cracked, betraying his fear. Mike's grip tightened his fingers, digging into Ryan's throat, a deliberate act of violence to remind the kid who was boss. "Don't play me." Mike hissed, his face so close Ryan could smell the tobacco on his breath. "Step out of line and you're done. Your career, your life gone." He released Ryan, who slumped against the locker, gasping, his neck red from the chokehold. Mike's paranoia was a living thing, now fueled by the suspicion that Ryan was slipping from his control. That moment of brute force was Mike's way of reasserting dominance, but it was also a sign of his unraveling a man who'd once hesitated, now crushed without a second thought. The precinct was a pressure cooker, its walls vibrating with the tension of unspoken alliances and betrayals. Mike's mind flashed to a recent incident. A young black man he'd arrested on a trumped-up charge of loitering, cuffed and shoved into a squad car, despite having done nothing but walk home from work. Order demands sacrifice. Mike had told himself, justifying the act as necessary to keep the streets in line. The man's pleading eyes haunted him for a moment, but he drowned the guilt in whiskey as always. That was the new Mike, ruthless, untouchable, a far cry from the rookie who'd once dreamed of making a difference. He'd learned that power, not justice, kept the world spinning, and he'd wielded it to build a network of loyalists who'd do anything to stay in his good graces. Ryan, rubbing his sore neck, stumbled back to his desk, his heart racing. Mike's attack wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration of war. Ryan had seen the man's cruelty before small acts of malice that chipped away at the precinct's soul, but this was different, personal. He thought of his sister, harassed by cops for no reason, and Sarah's call to action, step up or step out. The words burned in him a challenge to break free from Mike's shadow, but the fear was real. Mike had ruined lives, planted evidence, turned allies into enemies with a single phone call. Ryan's hand brushed the recorder in his pocket, its weight a reminder of the line he'd crossed. If Mike found out, he'd be finished. Mike, back in his office, stared at a faded photo of his parents, their smiles frozen in time. For a split second, he felt a pang of who he used to be, but he crushed it, replacing it with the cold certainty that survival meant control. Sarah was a threat, a wildfire he needed to snuff out before she burned his empire down. He didn't know Ryan's recorder was capturing his every move, didn't know the rookie was teetering on the edge of betrayal. The precinct felt like a battlefield, every whisper a potential landmine. Officers avoided Mike's gaze, sensing the storm brewing, while he plotted to tighten his grip to crush any spark of rebellion. The rain outside pounded harder, as if urging Mike to double down on his brutality. He'd always justified his actions' arrests without cause threats to keep his men in line as necessary for order. But Sarah's arrival had shaken that foundation, exposing the cracks in his carefully built world. He couldn't let her win, couldn't let her unravel the system that had kept him safe. Ryan's nervous glances replayed in his mind a warning he couldn't ignore. If the kid was turning, Mike would destroy him. He'd done it before, and he'd do it again. But, deep down, a flicker of doubt gnawed at him. Sarah wasn't like the others, and that scared him more than he'd admit. The bestial corruption of Mike exploded into a shockwave when Sarah revealed herself in the reform meeting, striking straight at the heart of the precinct. The Chicago police station's briefing room was a pressure cooker, its air thick with the stench of sweat and fear. The walls closing in as officers sat packed like condemned prisoners awaiting judgment. A flickering projector cast grim charts on a screen each bar, and number a silent indictment of the precinct's sins, botched cases, buried complaints. Lives ruined under the guise of order. Sarah Evans stood at the front, her chief's badge gleaming like a blade, her presence commanding the room like a warlord ready to burn it all down. Mike Larson slouched in the back, his face a storm cloud, eyes burning with defiance as he gripped his chair knuckles white. Ryan Carter, the rookie with a racing pulse, sat rigid, his hands trembling under the table, torn between awe and dread. David Brooks, the deputy chief, stood near the exit, his steady gaze a silent anchor for Sarah's mission. Emily, the battle-scarred Latina officer, watched with a clenched jaw, her scars a testament to years of surviving this toxic swamp. Sarah's voice sliced through the tension like a guillotine. "This precinct is a disgrace," she declared, her words sharp and unyielding, each syllable landing like a blow. "You've let power twist you into something the community can't trust." She gestured to the screen where data screamed of systemic failure, officers skating on misconduct victims, silenced trust shattered. "That ends today. I'm rolling out mandatory ethics training body cameras on every officer, and an oversight board to drag every dirty secret into the light. The room gasped a collective flinch as her words hit like a grenade. Mike's face twisted, his earlier confidence crumbling as he realized the scope of her assault. His chair creaked under his tightening grip, a splinter snapping as he fought to keep his composure. The drama erupted when Mike shot to his feet, his voice a guttural snarl. "You don't get this system, Evans." He barked, his words dripping with contempt like a cornered dog baring its teeth. "You think your fancy reforms will fix anything. You're clueless." Sarah didn't blink. She stepped forward, her eyes locking onto his like a predator's. "Clueless." She shot back, slamming her fist on the table, the sound echoing like a thunderclap. "I understand enough to know you're the kind of scum who throws coffee in a woman's face to feel big. You're done, Larson." Her words were a direct hit, referencing his brutal attack, and the room held its breath, officers shifting uncomfortably, some nodding in quiet agreement, others frozen in fear of Mike's wrath. Emily broke the silence, her voice raw and trembling with pent-up rage. "I've been here 6 years," she said, rising, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I've been mocked, sidelined, told I'm too weak because I'm a woman, too brown to matter. I'm done swallowing it." Her voice cracked, but her resolve was iron, each word a rebellion against the system that had ground her down. "Chief Evans, I'm in." The room stirred murmurs, rippling like a wave, some officers exchanging glances of shock, others feeling the weight of their own silence. Sarah nodded at Emily, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes, but her focus snapped back to the crowd. "This isn't a choice," she said, her tone cold and final. "You either stand for justice or you're out." The turning point came as Sarah unveiled her ace, a network of cameras to monitor every corner of the precinct inside and out, ensuring no act of cruelty could hide. "No one escapes accountability," she warned, her gaze piercing Mike like a spear. "Not even you, Larson." Mike's face went ashen, his bravado collapsing like a house of cards. He sank back into his seat, muttering, "This won't last." But his voice was hollow, drowned by the weight of Sarah's command. Ryan, watching from the sidelines, felt his heart race. Emily's courage, Sarah's fire, it was a call to action he couldn't ignore. His hand brushed the recorder in his pocket, its secret, a ticking bomb that could shift the tide. David, ever vigilant, noted the room's reactions, knowing this was the spark that could ignite a revolution. The room buzzed with tension like a storm about to break. Officers filed out, some whispering about Sarah's audacity, others casting wary glances at Mike. He stayed seated, his mind racing, plotting his counterstrike. Sarah's plan wasn't just a reform, it was a declaration of war on his empire. Emily's stand had cracked the precinct's silence, given voice to those who'd suffered under men like Mike. Sarah gathered her notes, her pulse steady despite the battle ahead. She'd thrown down the gauntlet, and the precinct was splitting, some drawn to her vision, others clinging to Mike's shadow. Ryan's eyes met hers as he left a flicker of resolve in his gaze. She'd need him and others like him to win this fight. Mike's world was crumbling, his control slipping like sand. He didn't know Ryan's recorder was a loaded gun, didn't know Sarah's cameras were already being installed. The precinct felt alive, a battlefield where every word carried weight. Sarah's resolve was unshakable. She'd faced worse odds and won. As she left the room, her boots echoed with purpose, each step a promise to dismantle the rot. Mike, alone, now dialed a number, his voice low and urgent, calling for backup. He'd fight dirty, as always, but Sarah was ready for the dirt. The explosive challenge of the meeting propelled Mike into escalating his conspiracy, rallying his venomous allies like a pack of snakes. In the dead of night, the Chicago police station's back room was a shadowy pit, its weak overhead light flickering like a dying ember, casting jagged silhouettes on the peeling walls. The air reeked of stale cigarette smoke and desperation, a fitting stage for Mike Larson's latest war council. He stood at the center, his face a twisted mask of malice eyes, glinting with the predatory cunning of a man who thrived on control. His loyal pack officers, who'd sold their souls for his favor, huddled around a scratched table, their faces pale under the dim glow. Tom Wilson, a veteran with a slouch that spoke of too many compromises, sat uneasily, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm. Mike's voice was a low, venomous hiss, each word a calculated strike. "Evans thinks she can gut us," he snarled, cracking his knuckles with a sound like breaking bones. "We'll make her regret stepping foot in this precinct." Mike's plan was a serpent strike, spread lies to paint Sarah as an incompetent outsider, a nobody who'd crumble under pressure. He leaned forward, his shadow looming over the group. "She's got no roots here, no allies," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "We whisper to the right people, and she's done before she starts." Tom shifted in his seat, his eyes flickering with doubt. His daughter, a college freshman, had been stopped by cops last year. Her car searched for no reason but her mixed heritage. The memory stung a raw wound that made Sarah's call for reform echo in his mind. "Mike," he ventured, his voice barely a whisper, "what if she's trying to fix things? My kid, she's been through enough." Mike's head snapped toward him, eyes blazing like coals. He grabbed Tom's collar, yanking him close his grip, a subtle act of violence. "Your kid." Mike growled, his breath hot and sour. "You want her to see you unemployed, scraping by, shut up and follow orders." The drama exploded in that moment, Tom's flicker of conscience clashing with Mike's ruthless intimidation. The other officers, spineless lackeys who'd long ago traded integrity for security, nodded like puppets, their silence a testament to Mike's grip. Tom's face paled, his hands trembling as he nodded, cowed by the threat to his family's future. Mike released him, a smirk curling his lips, satisfied with the fear he'd sown. But the air crackled with tension, the room a powder keg ready to ignite. Mike's plan wasn't just talk. He'd already reached out to a local reporter, a hungry vulture eager for a scoop. Later that night, in a dimly lit newsroom across town, Mike's email landed a poisoned dart filled with half-truths. Sarah was an outsider promoted too fast, clueless about Chicago's streets. The first article hit online by dawn, its headline screaming, "New Chief Out of Her Depth," painting Sarah as a reckless novice. That article was the turning point, a spark that set the precinct ablaze with whispers. Officers read it on their phones, some smirking, others uneasy, wondering how far Mike would go. The piece didn't name him, but his fingerprints were all over it, carefully crafted lies designed to erode Sarah's credibility before she could gain a foothold. Tom sat at his desk, the article's words burning in his mind, his daughter's face haunting him. He'd joined Mike's scheme, but each step felt heavier, like wading through mud. The precinct's air was thick with suspicion, every glance a potential betrayal. Mike, back in his office, leaned back in his chair, the creak of leather a smug victory. He thought he'd struck, first thought he'd outmaneuvered Sarah. But he didn't know about Ryan Carter's recorder, didn't know the rookie was a ticking bomb. Ryan, hiding in the break room, overheard the officers' murmurs, their voices low but sharp with doubt. Some bought Mike's lies, others questioned if Sarah might actually change things. Ryan's hand brushed the recorder in his pocket. its weight a constant reminder of his dangerous choice. He thought of his sister, her fear under a cop's flashlight, and Sarah's fiery challenge to stand up or get out. The article's lies twisted his gut. Mike wasn't just fighting Sarah, he was fighting anyone who dared hope for better. Ryan's resolve hardened, but fear kept him silent for now. He needed time-proof, a way to use the recording without losing everything. Mike's smirk faded as he checked his phone, the article's comments section already buzzing with outrage against Sarah. He'd planted the seed and it was spreading like wildfire. But a nagging unease gnawed at him. Sarah's fire, her refusal to break, wasn't like anything he'd faced before. He'd crushed rivals with less. But she was different. A storm he couldn't predict. The precinct felt like a chessboard, each move a gamble. Officers who'd once cowered now whispered about Sarah's nerve, some daring to believe she could shift the tide. Tom's doubt lingered a crack in Mike's control, while Ryan's secret recording burned ready to explode. Late that night, Sarah's phone buzzed with an anonymous call, a distorted voice warning, "Watch your back, Chief." The words sent a chill down her spine, but they only sharpened her focus. Mike's game was on and she was ready to play. The precinct was a battlefield now, and the first shot had been fired. The venomous rumors spread like wildfire, plunging Sarah into a public smear campaign with forged documents thrusting her into a hellish crisis. In the suffocating darkness of a seedy Chicago hotel room, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and treachery. The only light, a flickering neon sign outside casting red streaks across the grimy walls. Mike Larson sat across from Robert Callahan, a high-ranking city official with a smile as oily as his tailored suit, his eyes glinting with the cold calculation of a man who thrived on dirty deals. Mike's voice was a low growl, each word dripping with desperation as he slid a forged dossier across the table, accusing Sarah Evans of burying evidence in a decade-old case. "This will sink her," Mike said, his hands trembling with a mix of fear and fury. "She's digging too deep, Callahan. We need her gone." Callahan leaned back. His fingers steepled a predator sizing up his prey. "You're playing a dangerous game, Larson," he warned, his voice smooth but lethal. "If this backfires, you're on your own." The drama ignited when Callahan agreed to leak the dossier to a major newspaper, but not before a tense standoff. Mike, his patience fraying, lunged forward, slamming his fist on the table, the wood splintering under the force. "Don't screw me over." He snarled, his face inches from Callahan's veins bulging in his neck. "I've covered your ass for years." Callahan didn't flinch, his smile tightening into a threat. "Careful, Larson. You're a tool, not a partner." The near-violent clash hung in the air, a spark away from bloodshed, but Mike backed off, his heart pounding, knowing he'd crossed a line but had no choice. By morning, the article exploded online, its headline screaming, "Police Chief Accused of Evidence," tampering, painting Sarah as a corrupt fraud. The city erupted, social media buzzing with outrage, the story spreading like wildfire through Chicago's streets. Back at the precinct, Sarah sat in her office, the glow of her computer screen casting harsh shadows across her face, the damning headline glaring like a wound. Her hands shook as she read the lies accusing her of sabotaging a case years ago under her old mentor's shadow. The betrayal stung a raw echo of the pain she'd felt discovering James Harris's corruption. Rage surged through her, and she slammed her fist on the desk, the crack of wood echoing like a gunshot. "Damn him," she hissed, her voice trembling with fury, her mind racing to piece together Mike's scheme. This wasn't just an attack. It was a calculated strike to destroy her before she could expose the precinct's rot. She paced her boots, thudding against the floor, each step fueling her resolve to fight back. The turning point came when Sarah called in a forensic analyst, a sharp-eyed expert who'd worked with her on past cases. Within hours, he confirmed the dossier was a fake. Signatures forged dates, mismatched a clumsy attempt to smear her. Sarah's eyes blazed as she clutched the report, her anger now a focused weapon. She knew Mike was behind it, his fingerprints all over the lies. Ryan Carter, lingering outside her office, overheard her furious muttering and slipped inside his face, pale but determined. "Chief," he said, his voice low, "I've got something." He pulled out his recorder, its contents a ticking bomb from Mike's earlier threats. Sarah's gaze locked onto him, a spark of hope in the chaos. "You're risking everything, Carter," she said, her voice steady but heavy with gratitude. Ryan knotted his jaw tight. "I know, but I'm done being scared." The precinct was a tinderbox, officers whispering about the article, some smirking at Sarah's supposed fall, others uneasy, sensing the truth wasn't so simple. Mike, holed up in his office, scrolled through the online comments, a smug grin spreading as he saw the public turn against Sarah. He thought he'd won, thought he'd crushed her. But he didn't know about Ryan's recorder, didn't know Sarah was already dismantling his lies. The city's pulse quickened, reporters circling the station like vultures demanding answers. Sarah refused to respond, yet knowing a premature defense would only fuel the fire. She needed more hard evidence to bury Mike and his allies, not just words to counter his poison. Ryan's hands trembled as he left Sarah's office, the weight of his decision crushing him. He'd crossed Mike, a man who'd ruined lives for less. But the memory of his sister's fear, the sting of Sarah's resolve, pushed him forward. He wasn't just a rookie anymore, he was a soldier in her war. The precinct felt alive, its walls humming with secrets ready to spill. Officers who'd once bowed to Mike now questioned his grip, their whispers turning from fear to doubt. Sarah, back at her desk, pored over the analyst's report, her mind racing. Mike's attack was bold, but sloppy, and she'd use that against him. The city outside buzzed with chaos, but Sarah was a calm storm, her focus razor sharp. Mike, oblivious to the noose tightening, leaned back in his chair, the creak of leather a false comfort. He'd played this game before, smearing rivals, bending the truth, and always won. But Sarah was different, a force he couldn't predict. The article was just the start. He had more planned, darker moves to ensure her fall. Yet a flicker of unease gnawed at him. Her refusal to break her fire was something new. The precinct was a battlefield now, and Sarah was gaining ground. Ryan's recorder, still hidden, was a grenade waiting to explode, and Sarah's resolve was the fuse. The evidence of a sprawling, corrupt network thrust the conflict into a brutal realm of direct violence and personal threats sharp as a blade. Late at night, Sarah Evans' office was a battlefield strewn with papers, the faint glow of a desk lamp illuminating stacks of incriminating documents like relics of a war yet to be won. Outside, Chicago's streets were a treacherous maze where Ryan Carter ran, his breath-ragged heart pounding as a black sedan roared behind him, its headlights cutting through the dark like knives. He'd slipped into Sarah's office earlier, voice trembling as he handed her a thick file bank records-coded emails, memos exposing Mike Larson's ties to a sprawling web of corruption. "My sister got stopped last year," Ryan said, his voice breaking, harassed for nothing but her skin. "I'm done staying quiet." Sarah's eyes flashed with fierce gratitude, but the files revealed a chilling truth. Mike was a pawn for Robert Callahan, a city official orchestrating payoffs and cover-ups. The drama surged when Ryan, fleeing the station, felt a gloved hand clamp his throat in an alley, a faceless voice hissing, "Back off, or you're dead." He broke free, stumbling into the shadows, the violent threat, a raw jolt that hardened his resolve. Sarah, dissecting the files with David Brooks, saw the stakes skyrocket. Callahan's network reach deep, and she planned a direct strike using damning emails to expose him. Ryan's evidence was a grenade, but his near-death escape screamed of the danger closing in. The stakes soared when Sarah returned home to find her apartment ravaged, a cherished photo of her grandmother, Margaret, torn apart, a scrawled note snarling, "You're finished." Her heart raced as she heard a floorboard creak, drawing her gun and nearly catching the intruder before they vanished into the night. Mike's next blow was a video, his voice oily with fake sincerity, painting himself as a victim of Sarah's tyranny. It spread like a virus, fueling protests outside the precinct, a mob waving signs demanding her ouster. Sarah, unshaken, rallied Ryan and David, their late-night meeting a crucible of defiance as they compiled more evidence, wired transfers, tampered logs, all pointing to Callahan's grip. The drama peaked when Tom Wilson, guilt eating him alive, confessed to feeding Mike's lies, his voice cracking as he admitted, "I did it to protect my daughter." Sarah offered him redemption, her resolve a beacon as they prepared to strike. The precinct was a cauldron, Mike's allies wavering as his lies unraveled. The final battle erupted in a packed press conference, cameras flashing like a storm, as Sarah stood firm, her voice a blade cutting through the chaos. She laid out the evidence, Mike's bribes, Callahan's schemes, a corrupt network exposed in brutal detail. Protesters crashed the room shouting for justice, but Sarah's facts silenced their roar. Mike burst in, eyes wild, screaming, "You'll never win," before lunging, only to be tackled in a bloody scuffle, fists flying, a cop's jaw cracked. Handcuffed, he spat venom, but Sarah stood unmoved. Reforms rolled out ethics, training, open complaint systems, community forums, rebuilding trust. Linda Thompson, a local who'd once scorned Sarah, hugged her, tears falling as she whispered, "You saved my boy from their lies." Ryan emerged bold. Tom worked to atone, and the precinct's air lightened, laughter replacing fear. Sarah reflected on Margaret's words. Justice was a fight, not a gift. The community's faith grew a testament to her unyielding spirit, inspiring listeners to rise against injustice with fierce compassion. As the Chicago skyline glittered beyond Sarah Evans's office window, the city's pulse seemed to beat in time with her own, a rhythm of hard-won hope and relentless fight. Her journey from the scalding sting of Mike Larson's coffee to dismantling a corrupt network wasn't just a victory over one man. It was a battle cry for justice, echoing the fierce spirit of her grandmother, Margaret. Sarah's unwavering resolve, Ryan's quiet courage, and even Tom's redemption showed that change begins with those brave enough to stand against the tide, to face threats and betrayal with iron in their hearts. The precinct, once a den of fear, now hummed with possibility, its officers and community slowly stitching trust back together. This story isn't just about Sarah, it's about the power of one voice, one act to spark a revolution. What would you do when faced with injustice? Stay silent or fight? Share your thoughts below. And if this tale moved you, like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage and change.